Dan freaking Ives, the king of Tesla analysts, the most bullish analyst of Tesla of all times. Hold up, getting a message here.
Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, pick your spot. It's been bad.
Apparently, Dan Ives is not as bullish as it just was. But hold on. I'm just kidding. I love that. Look, Dan Ives, the king of Tesla analysts, he was on CNBC. Not as bullish as before, but more bullish than 99% of analysts. So you got to give him credit for that. He was talking about the current state of affairs of Tesla, which is the equivalent of getting 3 root canals without anesthesia at this point if you are a Tesla investor. But he was basically saying what needs to happen now, what needs to happen in the future for this stock price to start climbing up. Now, Tesla has lost 35% of its value in 2024, which basically means it's not a good year for Tesla so far. It's the lowest it's been since June of 2023. We have slowing growth. We have price cuts. We have China demand issues, slowing deliveries. 10% of employees are fired. Executives are leaving. So there's a lot of bad press, a lot of negative sentiment. And the one thing about, human beings is that we are much more sensitive to loss than to gains in the stock market. So the mathematical kind of equation is +1 for every percent point that your stock goes up and -2 for every 1% your stock price goes down. So when we see a 35% drop in Tesla in 1 year, not even in 1 year, and since the beginning of 2024, in 4 months, that's equivalent of a 70% gain in the same time. So we just experienced the 70% gain equivalent of a loss. So it's not a fun thing to be in as an investor, but if you have long-term perspective, that's actually not a bad thing, and I'll explain that in a second. But let's focus on what Dan Ives said.
This is probably the worst period that I've seen, I'd say in about 6 years for Tesla. And patience is wearing thin. And you see from an investor perspective, and obviously, many thrown in the towel, the long-term story is still there. And that's why we remain bullish. But no doubt, I mean, this is white knuckle. And there could be darker days ahead if Musk does not handle the call, I think, like an adult in the room and actually give some sort of vision and navigation with a lot of questions. Look, right now, I can tell you firsthand, China EV market, it's like the video thriller. Now, that's obviously been the huge headwind for Tesla, which is really, that's a key part of the growth, right, in terms of the China story. What I think investors need to hear is what's the strategy to turn this around? Are they going to maintain prices? And the big thing is Model 2. Like, you need Model 2 to have that growth story the next 18, 24, 36 months. This cannot just be about autonomy 5-6 years from now. And I think that's really the crucial point here that they need to get, and he needs to get on that conference call in terms of that point. I mean, if they don't do Model 2 and went straight to autonomy, that would be like being at a cliff in the Grand Canyon and looking down below. It's a scary proposition because when Tesla talks about 2 growth waves, the second wave is Model 2, refresh Model 3, Model Y, and obviously some other models that they're going to introduce. But that's the issue right now. In terms of Model 2, you cannot go straight autonomy. And obviously, some have reported it. And this is really what I view when I say clock striking midnight. It comes down from us. Navigate the Category 5 storm, just like he has in 18, 2020, and other. Otherwise, this is not just trust me, because I think that's really the frustration now that essentially is, went from a Cinderella story magic carpet ride to what's been a bit of a horror show, especially the last 3-4 months. Autonomy is going to be key, but we're not really going to see driverless, no steering wheels, 2030. And think about the regulatory involved here. So that sounds great on a PowerPoint and sci-fi in terms of what autonomy. And we do believe in the autonomous vision. But in the near term, it's about growth. What does free cash flow look like? How do you reverse the growth trend? How do you get to 3, 4, 5 million units? The only way you get there is with a sub $30K car, Model 2. For a product line that really hasn't had a refresh since Model Y. Cybertruck continues to be limited. That's not going to be mass market. And that's the issue here. give give real for the company didn't give guidance, right? So it's give what margins could look like. There'll be a lot of charges. Where does gross margins level out at? What's a realistic delivery number? Is it 1.95? Is it 2 million? What does growth look like? Like, give the 2 to 3 year targets. They need to basically reaffirm the Model 2, reaffirm the low cost vehicle, give a strategy in the next 6, 9, 12 months. This can't just be a trust me, autonomy, we'll be back to you in 2030. And that's why you're seeing many throw in the towel, because of the fears and a lot of the reporting that surrounds that, along with the cost cuts that were definitely, I'd say a little gut wrenching relative to a company that should, in theory, be in growth mode.
So then I said this was the worst period for Tesla in years. Stock price wise, he's right. Company wise, I'm not so sure. He is saying that the investors' patience is wearing thin. That's a factual statement. I think he's right. Lots of investors, especially in the retail community, are not happy with that. And that's normal. When your team keeps, losing and losing, a lot of fans stop showing up to the games. A lot of free riders on Tesla, a lot of bandwagon fans, so to speak, they're getting off right now. That's what she said. But that's normal. What I think is important in this interview is the fact that then I said, look, I'm still bullish on Tesla. Long term, the story of the Tesla growth is still fully intact. I do have problems with the way Tesla communicates with investors and with the way we have no transparency about the future strategy of how Tesla is supposed to handle this. And in that context, he also said what he thinks should happen in the earnings call next week, basically saying, look, it needs to be handled with lots of care. After the last couple of calls, people are not so confident about the way these calls are being handled. They have to go to Wall Street talk, not the Elon craziness that we've seen of the past two calls. But to me, it's kind of odd to hear him ask that. It's very hard to separate the craziness of Elon when it's good or when it's bad. I mean, Elon is Elon. This is what you get. You get the genius part. You get the crazy, innovative part. But you also get this. He's a very authentic person. He's not going to be a Wall Street CEO and then all of a sudden this crazy inventor. It's just the way it is. I mean, that's Elon. You have to live with that. You have to live with the good and the bad. Obviously, if Elon Musk goes fake mode and becomes just, talking Wall Street, people are going to lose trust in the company. I don't think that's a good idea. However, having said that, I do agree with a few points Dan made, which is what we need more from these calls, which is more transparency about the future, about the strategy, more talk about the current problems, the headwinds, and how the company plans to basically handle them beyond just a regular talk about, hey, in 2030, we're going to be absolutely massive. That is true. Dan agrees with this, and I agree with it. But, I'd love to hear more about what happens in the next couple of years, year, 2 years, 3 years, more in the short term, because we hear a lot about 2030 and the next 5 years, but it's okay to also give an update about what happens in the next year, even if it's not great. I think the China demand is where they need to kind of address the issue, because it's been circulating over social media, mainstream media, people hammering this China issue as if this is the end of Tesla. Obviously, it's not. I mean, come on. But you have to address it. If you ignore it and you don't say a word about it, it just makes you look bad. And why not? I agree with Dan on this point. He also talks about the fact that Model 2, which is that sub 30,000 vehicle, needs to come out soon because that's the next S-curve of Tesla. Basically, what he's saying is that, look, there's so much time from this point until FSD goes full mainstream, 5 to 7 years. We have to fill the gap with something that's like mass market. And I think Dan doesn't really trust the Cybertruck to go mass market like that, which it's, in my opinion, too early to call. But he's basically saying, look, the Cybertruck may or may not do it. I don't know. But if you come out with the Model 2, how he calls it, basically the sub $30,000 car, you're going to grab a lot of market share and you're going to generate a lot of income, a lot of revenue, and, it's going to hold you through until FSD comes in 2030. I agree with that point, but look, for Tesla, it's very, very hard to launch this car because it's going to be cannibalizing a lot of the existing inventory. Like Model 3 right now with the credits, it's not going to be a hell of a lot more expensive than this Model 2. So cannibalizing the Model 3 with this new vehicle, I don't know if Elon Musk wants to do it, especially if their focus, they have limited bandwidth. So they can work on the robotaxi project, they can work on, on the Tesla Semi, on the robotic stuff, on FSD. Do they really want to spread themselves so thin and add another massive undertaking like this and deplete their bandwidth even more with very limited reward? I mean, the Model 3 with credits is very, very close to that 30. And look, at the end of the day, it's a consumer product, which means it's very sensitive to macroeconomics. When you have interest rates, and look, most people actually finance these vehicles, interest rates are just so high, it's going to be very hard to push vehicles that, $35,000, $40,000 vehicles. Once interest rates start pushing down towards the last part of this year, maybe next year, you're going to see demand just go up in general, not just Tesla. We've seen from other vehicle manufacturers, it's not just Tesla. BYD is having a problem. Nobody's really like selling lots of vehicles right now. It's very, very hard in this environment. He also talked about the FSD, and he said, look, FSD 2030, full robotaxi, we're all on board on this, but there's a lot of regulatory challenges. There's a lot of R&D development challenges. So it's just, it's not here. It's going to be here in 5 to 6 to 7 years. It's too soon for me to make any sort of investment recommendations based on something that's not really proven yet. And the biggest difference between me and Dan is I don't think that the steering wheel is where it's at, which means Dan sees FSD only becoming mainstream once, we're talking about these steeringless cars where just literally drive themselves 100% of the time. For Tesla to make money off of FSD, that's not required. I mean, Tesla can make a lot of money off FSD, even if it's still a very advanced driver assist system at lower levels than Autonomy 5. So I think it's definitely the timeline is a lot quicker than 2030. I think that the final product doesn't need to be a sci-fi driverless the way Dan thinks about it. And I think that once that happens and Tesla becomes the license holder of this technology that nobody else will have, they're going to make a lot of money from the software, which is the ultimate goal of Tesla, which is something that Ron Barron talked about for years. Nobody else has this. It will become a standard, and then Tesla will be not just an auto manufacturer, they'll be the owner of the actual driverless technology that everybody will be using. And I think that's going to be an absolute cataclysmic event for Tesla stock. Warren Buffett literally told you this. You have to be greedy when everybody else is fearful. I mean, that's the way it is. It doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, it's quite hard to be greedy when everybody's telling you how bad Tesla is. That's just bad sentiment. And, easier said than done. But, the smart long-term investors, the bulls, they keep buying. And I do like what Dan said at the end of the interview, which is, hey, this is what I need from the upcoming earnings call. Give me margin updates. Give me delivery updates, give me growth projections for the next 2 to 3 years, and show me how the progress of everything, including AI, robotics, give me a little bit more transparency in the short term and address the issues instead of just basically saying, well, that's irrelevant, that's too small, we have way, way bigger fish to fry. I think what Dan is saying, it's not mutually exclusive. The fact that you have a cataclysmic volcano eruption of profits and revenue from FSD, from robotics, from all these things, which I believe to be 100% true, that does not exclude you from telling investors, hey, this is what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, even at the risk of sounding like a car company when you make these little updates. I think he's right. Why not? I think the advice that Dan is giving Elon here, and again, I don't think anybody can give Elon Musk advice about anything. The guy is a billionaire, one of the richest people on the planet. He has done plenty to prove. He doesn't need anybody's advice. But what I think Dan is saying here is like, look, I'm an investor. I represent a lot of institutional investors. If you want us to keep buying Tesla, you have to show us a little bit of risk management, a little bit of a de-risking of this situation for us to go on board with this project. You have to play the game based on our rules. We're the institutional investors. I totally understand that you're different, and we're going to give you some extra leeway that we don't give other companies, but you got to give us something here. And of course, at the end of the day, look, Dan hasn't changed his mind about the future upside of the company. I haven't as well. My total price target for Tesla is $1,400, but here's the thing. Yesterday, and I'll talk about in a second, I ran a video where I gave you the bottom line of the most bearish base case auto manufacturer valuation of Tesla. I'm going to put it right here on the screen. Go watch the video right now. If you haven't yet, join the Patreon, join the Discord. It's all in the description. All the links are there. I'll see you in the next one.